Good day, friends. Welcome to OBEJournal 2018, number 19. And as number 18 was concerning the activities of earthbound ghosts, entities, sometimes malevolent entities, and not all malevolent. Some are just playful and lost, or looking for a buddy. Don't know where to go when they hang out with you, or your house, or your family. But some are malevolent, and I think we need to examine the archives of other psychics and researchers on this matter. There's a lot in these archives, and I've got several books over the last few years, and it's been a challenge going through them and trying to decide which bits to use, because there is an abundance of material, and it's possible we'll have to go on to two shows, because I can't see me getting through even a third of what I've got bookmarked here in 40 minutes. Most shows are about 40 minutes. Wanda Pratnika, possessed by ghosts. Polish psychic, as you might have guessed by her name. Another book full of information and points of view and wisdom. Rather than outline the techniques or attitudes of the various practitioners, in order to save a little time, I'll just dive right into various case histories so that you can get an impression of the different types of entities that there are and what they can get up to. In a chapter called Rapes, a man once asked me, is it possible for the ghost raping someone to be an old man and the person they're raping an old woman? I said, but of course it is. After death, ghosts often acquire strength and have more energy than they did when they were living, which cannot be said of the partner who remains on earth. Very well, you passed my test, said the man. I asked this question in many parishes, monasteries, and even in the Vatican, and they all sent me away with nothing, thinking I was a madman. He started to tell me, my parents never lived in harmony. My father drank a lot, and he usually couldn't resist a skirt. When he died, he was nearly 90 years old. I'm sad to say that when he died, we all breathed a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, from the moment he died, I noticed something unnerving about my mother's behavior. At first, I thought she was taking my father's death badly. After all, they did spend a long time together. When I asked her, she waved me away, saying it was worse than that I couldn't even imagine. She didn't want to explain anything to me, but soon the situation clarified itself. Since I didn't want to leave her on her own in the state she was in, I resolved she would move in with me. I went to bed early because I had a heavy day at work. Through my sleep, I could hear muffled moaning sounds coming from my mother's room. I leapt to my feet, ran to her room, and saw her defending herself against someone who was invisible to me and seemed to be raping her. My mother is 86 years old, so I assumed all that sort of stuff was behind her. I stood as if I was rooted to the ground, not knowing what to do. Involuntarily, I shouted out, "Leave her, you bastard." My mother started to calm down. She burst into tears and said this had been happening since my father's death. He had frequently raised his hand to her. Whenever I stood up in her defense, he would leave her in peace. Just like now. I deduced that it must be him. He took fright at my voice just as he did when he was living. After a while, I came to the conclusion that apart from him there must be others, because my mother defended herself from all sides. She was at the end of her strength, almost lifeless. A doctor friend of hers who also witnessed an attack sent her to hospital and fortified her with medicines. My mother won't be able to keep going much longer. Can you help her? He asked me. I escorted the ghosts to the other side. There were indeed many of them. Wanda outlines her techniques earlier in the book, as do all the practitioners, and they're all slightly different. She tends to do it remotely from her own home to anywhere where she's asked. But that's why she says, I escorted the ghosts to the other side. There were indeed many of them. For a while there was relief, but after a few days I received a call that his mother was worse again. This lasted several weeks before we realized that his mother had entered into an arrangement with her husband's ghost. She let him have normal sex, but when he sometimes fancied something a bit stronger and summoned other ghosts to an orgy, then she turned to me for help. I protested. It turned out that she thought that since he was her husband, she had to put up with him even after death. When she said no, categorically, he left, albeit unconsoled, but he never came back. You don't even realize how many people are raped by ghosts day in, day out, and every night. The ghost rapist can be our life's partner or a complete stranger. It can be one ghost or a whole multitude. The victim of the rape can be anyone. Sometimes it can be a close friend who doesn't have the courage to talk about it. One might think it was just about a person's imagination, that it's not really happening. That's the conclusion usually reached by those people whom the afflicted person complains. The person might do it once or twice, but when the next successive attempt to tell someone meets with disbelief, they stop seeking help. I've been a witness to such scenes more than once. This isn't about suspecting everyone who behaves oddly of being raped, but about helping those people who ask us for help. How? By letting them know that such help is possible. Two friends of many years' standing who literally knew everything about one another came to me for therapy from the other end of Poland. I had met one of them once already when she needed my help. She tried in every way possible to get into the subject of ghosts, which for the other woman was ridiculous, superstitious, reminding her of children's games when the kids try to frighten one another. When the first woman wanted to say anything, the other would effectively make it difficult for her. I realized what was happening and guided the conversation accordingly. I saw relief on one face and an ironic grimace on the other. Taking no notice of that, I continued to direct the conversation. I wondered why the first woman had brought the other with her. If she had been on her own, we would have gone straight to the heart of the matter without going round in circles and wasting time. At a certain moment, I heard once again the ironic comment, I'm surprised that you've joined in with all those con artists we keep hearing about nowadays. I always regarded you as an authority, and that's why I came here from the other end of Poland, but I can see it's time wasted. I didn't have the time to reply before the first woman tore her blouse off. Her body looked like it had been massacred. There wasn't a spot on it without a scar, a bruise, or a scratch. She lifted her long skirt and showed her bruised, cut legs. Is this a waste of time? She shouted. I've tried to tell you so many times, but like you're deaf and blind. This is why I came here. It came out that for many years she was raped by a sadist ghost, and her closest friend didn't even suspect, or in any case didn't want to suspect. When people think about ghosts, they subconsciously feel that they do exist. The awareness that there exists a reality which they can't touch fills them with terror. They feel helpless because they think they have no influence on the other world. We started purification. The ghost would leave and then return. When we succeeded in escorting it away for keeps, the woman's body started to heal quickly, so that only faint scars remained to remind her of her tragedy. I have come across many similar cases in my therapeutic work. You can recognize the signs of rape from scars in people, and in others there is no trace. Fortunately for the patient, they don't have to explain where the bruises came from. This can often cause another tragedy because there's no rational way of explaining where they came from, yet there is this unequivocal indication of their origin. And later, a couple of pages later, it is also worth mentioning the matter of compulsive masturbation. Many men feel that since they feel this compulsion, they must be mentally ill. Masturbation can be caused by ghosts. When a ghost of a woman desires to have sex with a man, he feels it, but he doesn't see her. Sometimes he may be very stimulated, and quite often he feels raped. When this happens, often he doesn't notice the object who desires him, i.e. rapes him. He accuses himself of sensual depravity. For many men, this can occur in the least expected of places, completely out of the blue. Often, in a panic, they will go into the bushes or a stairwell or somewhere aside to hide themselves from public view, since it's hard to conceal a swollen member. Sometimes they might come across children playing in the area where they might be suspected of pedophilia, whereas in fact the children were drawn there only by curiosity. Many men experience great stress and humiliation when they're suspected of deviance. The same applies to self-exposure. The raped man sometimes doesn't want to soil his underwear with sperm, will expose himself somewhere in hiding as he waits for the ghost's attack to pass. And when he's seen, what he's seen may be regarded as deviant. Men in the same situation as women being raped, but rape on them is more visible than rape on women. After cleansing the above problems, they leave along with the ghosts. This happens, of course, only in cases of possession. By no means am I saying that every deviant act is caused by ghosts. Mental illnesses. It can happen that a normally functioning person may suddenly, from one hour to the next, stop knowing who they are, what they're saying, what they're doing. They see visions, they hear voices. They can sense that they're being touched, forced to do things, they feel compulsions. They may not notice scratches or wounds on their bodies and not know where they have come from. Or they may. They may be aware of the moment the injury occurred, see the blood flowing, and feel pain even though they are far from sharp objects. A person who till then had been active, sociable, cheerful, may suddenly become closed in on themselves. It may be hard to make contact with them. They themselves may start to have suicidal thoughts. Or vice versa. A calm person may become aggressive, ready to destroy everything in one moment, sometimes even to kill someone. Their eyes emanate hatred towards those they have loved until now. A refined person may suddenly become vulgar, swearing at people for no reason, in a streetcar, a shop, a church, or a street. They may smell some scent everywhere, anything from a pleasant one to a terrible odor, or vice versa. People around them may smell an unpleasant stench coming from the person, even though that person may wash constantly. These symptoms don't, of course, appear simultaneously in one person, even though that can happen. These phenomena can barely be perceptible to the afflicted person, but very obvious to those around him, or vice versa. They may be annoying, interfering considerably in a person's normal behavior, and can even stop them functioning normally, but may be completely imperceptible to those around them. A person like that, when he's with other people, may see or hear something very clearly, which no one else can, even though subjectively these signals are of a very powerful intensity. Doctors have classified this kind of behavior or state as a manifestation of schizophrenia or some other mental illness. This kind of person is universally regarded as insane. When these symptoms grow more intensive or cause a threat to society's safety, these people are locked up in psychiatric hospitals. These symptoms and many others I've not mentioned are a clear sign of the presence of ghosts within a person. Every psychiatric illness presents symptoms similar to the ones I've mentioned above. It occurred to me that since there is a similarity then maybe its cause is also the same. Cases of psychiatric illness I've come into contact with have confirmed my conviction that this is really so. I have collected several thousands of them, and they're all very similar to each other. My many years' experience have taught me that every mental illness arises when the afflicted person allows themselves to be not only possessed, but surrender their body and their mind in their totality to the ghost, yielding themselves to its will. Every case, of course, is different. In some cases, a person is himself for a moment, then somebody completely different, then himself again. The moments when he is somebody else are not noticed by the patient, nor indeed remembered. The human mind can be compared to the activity of a computer. The information when the ghost is present within the sick person is written onto the hard disk of the ghost, not the sick person. It's a bit like the sick person giving himself a vacation from being himself. During that time, it's the ghost that directs his body and mind. That's where the memory gaps in the sick person come from. Other times, the sick person is someone completely different constantly, and rarely themselves. This happens when the body and the mind are surrendered to the will of many different ghosts. In extreme cases, a person's spirit may be ejected from its own body by ghosts and forced to exist outside. Such cases are not at all rare. They depend on the level of the person's possession. There may be hundreds of ghosts possessing just one person. In the Bible, they were called legion. Luke 8:30. A sick person may be aware of themselves but may be too weak mentally to stand up to ghosts or the ghosts. They steal a person's body and the sick person doesn't know how she can defend herself. A lot depends on the environment she lives in. When it is a friendly one and supportive, then her chances of staying healthy are greater. But if she is alone with her problem or meets with relief when talking about it, then she may give up and fall ill. A lot depends too on the reaction to the ailment of doctors, psychiatrists, and ministers. If they are unable to explain to the patient the reasons for her state, then they drive her ever more deeply into a state of illness. To make the splitting of personality and many other mental illnesses more comprehensible, I will draw a comparison of the body with that of a ship at sea. A mentally well person is like a captain on a ship. He steers it competently, avoiding the dangers it comes across. He steers it confidently because even in the greatest storm, nothing can threaten him, since he is in care of God. A captain like that won't allow unauthorized passengers to come aboard his ship. He will always know where the ship is and what the course is. But there are other kinds of captain. They rarely stand on the bridge and steer, allowing the ship to drift aimlessly in the ocean, usually because they're afraid. They also allow unasked passengers to come aboard and do whatever they like. A person suffering from schizophrenia is just that kind of ship, filled with passenger ghosts, without a captain on the bridge. The captain, as the owner of the ship, can be present on it throughout the trip, but the passengers or the ghosts won't let him near the wheel. When some passenger grabs hold of the wheel, he will ignore the presence of the captain and steer the ship on his way. Sometimes the captain won't grab the wheel even when there is no one steering. In extreme cases, the captain may be thrown overboard, in other words, out of his own body. The passenger ghosts, seeing the bridge free, will steer the ship in their own way, but even they, after a while, will abandon this pastime for various reasons. Sometimes the passengers know nothing about the presence of the captain or the other passengers on the ship. The captain may not apprehend the presence of passengers on the deck. Every one of them considers the ship to be their own property and behaves in accordance with that belief. Sometimes all the passengers want to steer the ship at the same time, and they fight amongst themselves for the power. That's when attacks of mental illness are exacerbated in the owner's body ship. When there is no volunteer among the passengers to steer the ship, the captain resolves to stand on the bridge at last, and then we may notice a momentary improvement in the sick person's condition. His self-awareness returns and he may be released from hospital. He is not well, though. His ghosts are still inside him and have only taken a vacation from steering the body. If such a person knew the reason for their problems, they would most probably fight. but they do nothing about it because they think they're in a situation over which they haven't the slightest influence. Sometimes it seems to them that they have gone mad. They are in great error. This is the best possible moment for the person, ill till now, to resolve to stand at the wheel as captain. But somebody would have to reappraise them of it, repeat it to them more than once until they acknowledged it. Then the sick person could gain control of their own life. For example, in the chapter When a Mother Dies, I described the fate of a man who spent 12 years in a psychiatric hospital suffering from severe schizophrenia. Its cause was his own mother. Instead of going to the light after her death, motivated by a blind love for her son, she remained and looked after him just as she had done when alive. She drove him to severe illness. When he discovered the cause, he demanded the right to his own life. Even though he had to wage war against himself and his mother, he didn't allow her possessive affection to continue deciding about his life. He fought for his life and he won. Many patients decide to take that step when they discover the cause of their misery. They do not allow the ghosts to continue to interfere with their own lives. Even though the ghosts occasionally return, they courageously keep steering their own ship. Sometimes the family and friends, even when they know that the cause of the illness is possession, continue to conceal the fact from the sick person. They judge that he is not in a state to cope with the knowledge about himself, about ghosts, and about possession. They don't realize how great that error is. When a patient finds out for the first time about the cause of their illness, she will often say joyfully, "Mrs. Pratnika, now at least I know what's wrong with me. What you tell me is an explanation for my ailments, and it's proof that I haven't gone mad. Now at last I can see that I can be free of it. From then it's just a tiny step to return to full health." This awareness gives the patient the strength to take the wheel of her life into her own hands. For there are many who are possessed just like her, not mentally ill. All the time that they are afflicted, they don't allow ghosts to steer their ship, even when the ghosts fight to do so. The cause of mental illness is not so much being possessed by too many ghosts or ghosts that are too powerful, but the fact that the sick person, not knowing what's happening to them, become very frightened and give up without a fight. I know of a case where a person was possessed by hundreds of ghosts and continued to function normally. Whereas with another person, just one ghost can enter and he won't be able to deal with it or himself. I dare to suggest that the chief cause of mental illness is the patients and their families' ignorance of the fact that their bodies and minds have been taken over by ghosts. Even though I have had many successes, I am conscious of the fact that it's not possible to help every sick person permanently. I can help only those people who wish to help themselves. But even those who haven't yet decided to do that can be helped for just a short while. They are given a chance by God, and they can consider whether they want to continue being ill or whether they want to get well. In a chapter called Suicides and Murders. As I've written earlier, it's easier for a ghost to enter a person than it is for it to get out. Also, it can turn out to be an inappropriate place for it to stay. If during its life a ghost had carefully planned its future, then after its death, it will seek a suitable subject. The person it chooses must suit it in every respect. It's a bit like choosing friends. Some friends suit us, others less so. With some people, we are like proverbial blood brothers, while in the wrong company, we don't have anything to say to one another. Most often the people about whom the ghost knows just about everything, knows them in depth, and are members of its family or friends. The ghost's task is then made easier. Immediately after a funeral and during mourning, we are very open to a ghost, and we willingly, although it may be unknowingly, allow it to come inside. For we are not aware of the consequences of doing that. It can be well that somebody suits a ghost in every respect, but that person still has to allow it to enter. It happens that a ghost can't possess the selected victim in any way. It lies in wait for an opportunity, but it depends on the person as to whether or not it succeeds. The ghost may never find its way in. In our normal state of consciousness, there are defense mechanisms like sensors warning that someone is trying to break into us. But there are situations where people lose control over themselves and aren't aware of themselves. This happens after the consumption of alcohol, drugs, in any alternative state of consciousness, after the loss of consciousness, a strong blow to the head, during an operation when we're under anesthetic. That's when a ghost can take charge of our body without our knowledge or permission. Sometimes after death, a ghost may be sorry for the people it has abandoned, so sorry that it decides to stay with them for just a short time. It stays at the optimum time for leaving when it still has the strength to. Then it has no possibility of choice. After a while, it may stop suiting it to stay. It would like to leave, but is unable to do so. The same situation applies to a ghost which has found its way by chance into a person who is not appropriate for it. It is of no importance for our discussion to wonder the way or reason why the ghost answered a given person. It simply wants to leave, tries various methods but without any effect, feels like it was in prison or even worse. It then has two options: to wait for the person to die and be free of them in that way, or persuade them to die. The kind of death is, of course, neither here nor there. Persuading somebody to kill themselves is far more difficult for the ghost than it might appear at first sight. A normal, healthy human has encoded in him or her very powerful need for life. I'd say drive to exist, but anyway. If someone wanted to take it away from them, or they were suddenly about to lose it, additional powers are released within them to save that life. How then does a ghost manage to carry out its plans? First of all, by cutting off a person from their surroundings, by fully occupying their consciousness with its presence. A bit like joining a cult. Not knowing about this, the person will close in on him or herself, become inaccessible to the dear ones. With a great effort, he or she will do what they have to and no more. The ghost forcefully pushes away everyone from the person possessed. We feel uneasy in that person's company. We get shivers. It feels unpleasant, so we avoid them more and more, and they avoid us. The ghost will make the possessed person have an aggressive attitude to their surroundings. They may pick on minutiae, start arguments. The possessed person will also feel so bad that they will look for escape just so they can forget, even for a moment, about the nightmare they find themselves living. They seek to forget through alcohol, drugs, relentless work. Keep that in mind, relentless work. Sometimes their dear ones, friends, acquaintances won't interfere with their life, judging what someone does is their own affair and that everyone has the right to live their lives in any way they want to. Sometimes this stems from general indifference. Most often, though, it's because people are so preoccupied with themselves and their family responsibilities, their work, they don't notice the next person is in need of help. After prolonged struggles with the ghost residing in the body of someone we know, we come to the conclusion that the possessed person has upset us so much with their behavior that we have had enough of them, and it would be best if they vanished from our sight. This is exactly what the ghost wants most of all, to have the possessed person completely to itself. What the ghost does to us, we ascribe to the person's malice, and they in turn think exactly the same way about us. We don't realize that there is an enormous gulf between us and the possessed person, which is completely filled by the ghost, which is pulling all the strings that are, of course, invisible to us. We move away from the possessed person and they away from us. The ghost doesn't need to bother about us. The possessed person sinks farther and farther into hopelessness and is just one step away from deciding to commit suicide and releasing the ghost from the unsuitable subject. It starts to prove to the possessed person that their life has no point at all. How? by making everything vile to them. Whatever they may do is wrong. This isn't constructive criticism aimed at pointing out errors which can be put right. The ghost wishes to persuade the possessed person that they are worthless, garbage, not even someone, but something that has no value. It's most difficult for the ghost at the start when a person still has a lot of awareness and knows that they can achieve something, are loved and accepted. When the ghost arranges or stumbles across some psychological low, it exploits the opportunity, since then it will be much easier for it to immerse a person in depression. If, despite all these procedures from the ghost, the person continues to have support from their family or friends, the ghost would have huge problems in persuading them to commit suicide. When close friends notice that someone has a symptom of closing in on themselves or a constant feeling of hopelessness, they should be aware that this is a warning sign and that they should start looking for help. It's very easy to overlook this moment, then one regrets it for the rest of one's life, when all that was needed was to find a good exorcist. One doesn't need to go to them, it's enough to inform them by phone or letter, and the exorcist will cleanse the possessed person at a distance. That's what Wanda does. I don't know, I can do it a little bit. I've been asked to do it once in a while. Get rid of, entities. I don't know, 2 or 3 times a year maybe. Many people have told me that they made light of the symptoms mentioned above. Sometimes there are families where several suicides follow each other. Some people have experienced this in most macabre ways. A ghost persuaded members of the family to commit suicide, and now it's persuading you to kill yourself? Could this not have been prevented? Listen to what happened to one family in England. The husband committed suicide. Though the wife was sad, as was one after the death of anyone with whom one has spent years of one's life, she didn't despair for too long. They had rarely been able to come to an understanding together. Then a few months later, the daughter committed suicide. This loss shook the mother to a far greater extent. She explained her daughter's death by the strong emotional bond she'd had with the father. Suddenly she noticed that a voice had appeared urging her to commit suicide. It was only then that she realized what the cause of the previous 2 deaths had been. Then she started to look for help and found me. She understood that if she'd been more watchful, she'd have likely have saved those 2 lives. It was easy to lead the ghost away, and no one else in the family suffered. Another example. A woman with fear in her voice phoned me. She asked me to help her husband, who she suspected might commit suicide. I asked her why she thought that. Is her husband talking about it? He's not, quote, he's not, but this year there have been already 4 suicides in her home, and my husband has changed just like the others, she replied. 4? Wow. I asked how he was behaving. Was he drinking, picking arguments? As he closed in on himself? No, he's not drinking. My father-in-law, his brother, and his brother-in-law all drank, and often. Only the mother-in-law didn't drink. He's acting as strangely as they did. He sits like he was far away and says nothing. We have 4 small children. You must help. What will happen if he kills himself? I won't be able to cope. Then she started to cry. I checked, and he was indeed possessed by a murderous ghost. I fought with it for about a year until it finally went away. It was exceptionally vicious. Besides, it will keep bringing a disgusting smell into the house. When it left the person, it was impossible to sit in that room. They ripped up the floorboards, stripped the plaster several times before I heard about it, and told them that the cause of the unpleasant odor was the ghost. After it had left, the danger passed, nor is the odor there anymore. It can happen that a ghost will try to persuade someone to commit suicide and the person doesn't respond. It might then persuade the person to murder. In many countries, the punishment for murder is the death sentence, and the ghost knows that. It was all the same to the ghost how it is released from the unwanted person. The eventual effect will be that person's death and freedom for the ghost. When a ghost frees itself from a person, it doesn't often know what to do next. It doesn't know how to pass through to the other side of death's curtain. It remains on this side, and shortly it runs out of vital strength, and sooner or later it will have to hook up to another person. It can happen that one, too, is unsuitable. It can happen that one, too, is unsuitable for it. After the first suicide, the ghost might think that the punishment is awaiting for it and that the death will be hellfire and they won't want to do it again. Another ghost won't harbor such fears and will decide that punishment awaits it whatever. So it's all the same. Sometimes leading people to suicide or murder becomes a kind of game for the ghost, sometimes akin to a gamble, a challenge, and we'll see nothing wrong in it. Since there is no death for the ghost, there's no death for the victims either. And yeah, this is very true. This is something I know quite a bit about. Callousness, a game-playing callousness. And how people get that way, well, it's their previous physical existence before they became a ghost that would make them callous, I would think. And be all kinds of nasty stories surrounding that. And I think we'll get into that and some of the other practitioners. One time I was visited by a woman of about 40 who asked me to help. Miss Pratnika, please hear me out. If you're to understand me fully, I have to start at the very beginning. When I was young, I got to know a boy whom I married in quick time. We had 2 children. One day he went out. I thought it was for cigarettes, and he never came back. To begin with, I worried that something had happened to him, something bad, but I was told he was fine and living in another town. From one day to the next, I had to learn how to manage everything myself. The children very much wanted their daddy. They talked only about him for most of the time. One day my little son asked some man in the yard if he'd like to become his daddy because his real daddy no longer wanted him. The man was kind-hearted and agreed. He thought, what harm can it do me? I'll give the child some joy. When he grows up, he'll get over it, but for now, let him be happy. A couple of days later, when I came back from the shops, my son introduced me to his daddy. We were both astonished. I explained to the children that one doesn't find a daddy like this, but they would concede, and they wouldn't concede. One day, Roger and I both decided that, for the children's sake, we would play at being a family a bit. After some time, we grew closer to each other and we became a successful couple and a magnificent family. The children were quite big one day when their real father appeared in the doorway claiming he had a right to the home because it was in his name. He also demanded to be part of the family since I hadn't divorced him. He was very insistent, so Roger had to leave the house for a while. He moved into a renter bachelor apartment and missed us all very much. And we missed him. We all started meeting with him at his own place. We would most willingly have moved there ourselves, all 3 of us, but it was simply too small. Besides, everything in the house was what Roger and I had put into it. We were a family, even though not legally speaking. My former husband was in no hurry to leave his new abode, even though nothing in it was his. We waited for the court's decision regarding the division of property and the separation. One time I visited Roger without the children. We both wanted each other very much, and I stayed a little longer than usual. We made plans for the future. We wondered how to get out of the situation. Then we started to make love. Suddenly, Roger leapt out of bed like a scalded cat and ran out naked, carrying his pants in his hand. I was amazed by this behavior. I'd known him for more than 10 years. He had never done anything like that before. I quickly threw something on and followed him into the corridor. From the doorway, I could see a shaken Roger standing over an old man who was lying on the floor, looking like he was dead. Suddenly, Roger recovered his senses, looked down at his hands in surprise, then down at the man lying there and just stood like that for a while. He ran into the room and quickly dialed a number. Turned out he'd called the police and told them he'd just killed the man. Before the police came, he told me why he had done it. He said that while making love, something was very insistently ordering him to kill me. It was so strongly hypnotic that he couldn't resist the command. However, his love triumphed. He ran out into the corridor to calm down and light a cigarette. The old man was walking past at the moment. He had no idea how he did it. Between his leaving and my appearance in the corridor, only the shortest moment had elapsed. Roger didn't know the man, or even if he had known him, he wasn't capable of harming him. The police arrived, and without asking anything, they manacled him and took him away. Now he's under arrest and waiting the verdict. Miss Pratnika, how is this possible? I think I'm going mad. You must help me. Such a good man. Everyone will testify to that. I checked, and Roger did indeed have inside him a killer ghost. I had a dilemma about what to do. If I cleansed him, the court would find him guilty of murder and sentence Roger for the deeds of the ghost which had lived in the apartment. I could do nothing and count on the possibility that they would find him insane and leave him to a psychiatric doctor. On the other hand, I knew only too well that while he was in his cell, he could do it again to himself or someone else. I knew the truth and could do nothing with it. I couldn't appear in court as an expert witness because my truth would be no kind of evidence for the court, even though I would have stated categorically that it wasn't Roger who killed the man but a murderous ghost. Fortunately, the psychiatrist diagnosed schizophrenia and he was detained in a psychiatric unit. He is now free, and he is also free of the ghost which possessed him. Well, there you go. There's lots more interesting stuff there. In fact, I had to stop that story in the middle. Well, not quite in the middle, but, you know, more interesting stuff after. Sorry about that, but there is an abundance of material in these books. I've got, I think, 4 others. We haven't even got to them yet. So if you're interested, follow me and we'll get to more of this stuff fairly soon. It's not pleasant, but it's a reality. It's a spiritual reality of the lower astral. And some, if not many of you, will be exploring the lower astral. And at some point, you will either run into this sort of thing or will be guided to it when your guides, your real guides, will feel that you're ready for it. So unpleasant as this may be, it is a part of our spiritual journeys, I feel. And let that settle with you. Don't get too freaked out.